Why the things that once made you happy no longer move you. Emotional numbness and the link to chronic stress. There is a moment many people cannot explain. Nothing terrible has happened. Life continues. The same songs play. Friends still laugh. Sunsets still glow. And yet, something is missing. The feeling is gone. What once sparked joy now feels distant, like watching someone else's life through glass. The quiet confusion. You notice it slowly. The movie that used to make you cry doesn't. Your favorite food tastes ordinary. Achievements feel flat. Even rest feels empty. You don't feel deeply sad. You don't feel deeply happy. You just feel less. This state has a name: emotional blunting. What emotional numbness really is. Emotional numbness is not the absence of feeling. It is the nervous system protecting itself from overload. When stress becomes chronic, the brain shifts into conservation mode. Instead of riding emotional waves, it dampens them. The same system that reduces anxiety also reduces joy. The volume of life is turned down, not selectively, but globally. Pleasure softens, excitement fades. Even love can feel muted. Not because it disappeared, but because your nervous system is overwhelmed. The hidden role of chronic stress. Chronic stress does not always feel dramatic. It can look like constant pressure, unresolved worries, emotional strain, lack of safety, decision fatigue, never fully resting. When the brain perceives ongoing threat, it prioritizes survival over experience. Stress hormones remain elevated. The nervous system stays alert. Energy is redirected toward protection. Joy requires openness, safety, presence. Survival mode suppresses all three. Over time, the brain learns, do not feel too much. Feeling is costly. So it numbs. Why joy disappears first. Joy is one of the most energy-intensive emotions. It requires engagement with the present moment, curiosity, vulnerability, psychological safety. When the system is overloaded, these functions shut down first. This is why people often say, I'm not sad, I just don't feel happy anymore. This isn't emptiness, it is exhaustion. The nervous system in protection mode. Imagine living next to a constant alarm. At first, it is loud and distressing. Eventually, your brain dulls the sound so you can function. But in dulling the alarm, it dulls silence too. This is how emotional numbing works. The brain lowers sensitivity to survive prolonged strain. You are not broken. You are adapted. The invisible grief. Many people blame themselves. I should be grateful. My life is fine. Why can't I feel happy? This creates secondary pain, guilt. But emotional blunting is not a personal failure. It is a physiological response to prolonged pressure. Your nervous system did not betray you. It protected you the only way it knew how. The turning point. Here is the crucial truth. When joy disappears, it does not mean joy is gone. It means your system no longer feels safe enough to experience it. Joy is not forced. it is allowed. And it returns not through chasing happiness, but through restoring safety, rest, and emotional space. Closing reflection. If the world feels muted lately, if beauty feels distant, if happiness feels unreachable, it may not be that life lost its color. It may be that your nervous system dimmed the lights so you could endure the storm. And when safety returns, when pressure softens, when your system learns it can rest, feeling will return. Not all at once, but quietly, gently, like light at dawn. When the nervous system stays in survival mode, living in constant alertness, and why the brain stops seeking pleasure. At some point, exhaustion stops feeling like tiredness. It begins to feel like vigilance. You wake up already tense. Your body feels braced for something unnamed. Your mind scans the day ahead for problems that haven't happened yet. Nothing is wrong in this moment, yet your system behaves as if danger is near. Life in a state of constant readiness. When stress persists long enough, the nervous system stops returning to baseline. Alertness becomes the default. You begin to live in a state of anticipatory tension. Your shoulders tighten without noticing. Your breathing stays shallow. Your thoughts rehearse future scenarios. Your body never fully powers down. This is not dramatic panic. It is quiet, continuous readiness. As if life is an emergency that never fully arrives and never fully ends. Survival mode is not a feeling. It is a state. Survival mode is a neurological priority shift. When the brain perceives ongoing threat, whether physical, emotional, financial, or relational, it reallocates resources. Energy moves away from curiosity, creativity, pleasure, long-term thinking, and toward vigilance, risk detection, control, damage prevention. This shift is not conscious, it is biological. Your nervous system is not asking, "How can I enjoy life?" It is asking, "How can I stay safe?" The cost of constant hypervigilance. Living in prolonged alertness has subtle consequences. Rest never feels restorative. Silence feels uneasy rather than peaceful. Free time creates tension instead of relief. The mind resists slowing down, because slowing down feels unsafe. If you relax, you might miss something. If you stop scanning, something could go wrong. If you let go, control disappears. So the system remains ready, even when there is nothing to fight. Why the brain stops seeking pleasure. Under normal conditions, the brain is wired to seek reward. Pleasure reinforces behavior. Curiosity drives exploration. Enjoyment deepens connection. But in survival mode, reward-seeking becomes secondary. The brain reduces dopamine activity, the neurochemical linked to motivation and pleasure, and prioritizes threat detection. Why? Because pleasure requires openness. Exploration involves risk. Joy requires vulnerability. Survival mode avoids all three. From a biological perspective, seeking pleasure during perceived danger is inefficient, so the brain adapts. Focus on safety, ignore reward. When safety feels more important than happiness. You may notice this shift in subtle ways. You stop looking forward to things. You cancel plans not from sadness, but from depletion. Fun feels like effort. Relaxation feels unfamiliar. This is not laziness, it is conservation. Your system is preserving energy for perceived threat. The nervous system that forgot how to exhale. When stress is acute, the nervous system activates and then releases. When stress is chronic, activation becomes continuous. It is like inhaling and never fully exhaling. The body holds tension, the mind holds vigilance, the system holds readiness. Over time, this becomes the new normal. You forget what ease feels like. The invisible adaptation. Many people interpret this state as personal failure. Why can't I relax? Why don't I enjoy anything? What's wrong with me? But nothing is wrong. Your nervous system has adapted to prolonged pressure. It has chosen protection over pleasure, survival over expansion, safety over aliveness. This is not weakness, it is intelligence. The path back to feeling. The nervous system does not exit survival mode through force, it exits through signals of safety. Predictability, restorative, rest, emotional security, slower rhythms, moments without performance pressure. Only when the brain perceives safety does it reallocate energy back to curiosity, connection, and joy. Pleasure does not return because you demand it. It returns because your system no longer feels under threat. Closing reflection. If you feel constantly braced, if relaxation feels unnatural, if joy feels irrelevant, you may not be broken. You may be living in a nervous system that learned to survive too well. And when safety is restored, when vigilance softens, when your body learns it can exhale again, life will feel less like a battlefield and more like a place you are allowed to inhabit. I feel like a different person. Re-evaluation of values and why old goals stop inspiring you. There is a moment after deep hardship when you look at your life and feel something unsettling. You recognize everything, but you no longer recognize yourself within it. The ambitions that once drove you feel distant. The dreams you chased feel irrelevant. The version of you that built this life feels like someone you used to know. And the question emerges, what happened to me? The quiet shift after survival. Major stress, loss, burnout, or emotional upheaval does not only exhaust us, it changes us. During prolonged difficulty, the mind reorganizes priorities around survival, endurance, and meaning. When the crisis passes, life may appear the same on the outside, but internally, the architecture has changed. You are not returning to who you were, because the person who lived before the crisis did not experience what you did. I became a different person. Many people describe a strange internal distance. Old conversations feel uninteresting. Old environments feel foreign. Old habits feel incompatible. Old identities feel constricting. This can feel frightening. But personality is not fixed. It evolves in response to experience. Crisis accelerates this evolution. What you once tolerated may now feel impossible. What once mattered may now feel trivial. What once motivated you may now feel empty. This is not loss of self, it is transformation. When values are rewritten, hard experiences strip away assumptions. They expose fragility. They reveal what is essential. They clarify what truly sustains you. After crisis, many people discover shifts such as achievement to meaning, status to authenticity, speed to presence, approval to inner alignment, productivity to emotional health. The metrics that once defined success no longer feel sufficient, because you have seen what survives when everything else falls away. Why old goals stop inspiring you? This shift can feel confusing. I worked so hard for this. Why doesn't it matter anymore? Goals formed by an earlier version of you were shaped by earlier needs: validation, security, belonging, identity, external approval. But after hardship, the psyche seeks different nourishment: purpose, peace, stability, truth, emotional safety. When inner needs evolve, external ambitions can lose emotional charge. This is not failure of motivation, it is misalignment. You have not lost drive, you have outgrown the destination. The grief of outgrowing your former life. Transformation carries an invisible grief. You may mourn who you used to be, what once excited you, the simplicity of earlier dreams, the certainty you once felt. Even positive growth contains loss, because every new identity requires releasing an old one. This grief is not regression, it is integration. Between identities, the uncomfortable middle. There is often a transitional space where the old self no longer fits, the new self is not fully formed. This in-between phase can feel disorienting. You may feel unmotivated, detached, or directionless. But this is not emptiness, it is incubation. Your psyche is reorganizing around deeper truth, and clarity cannot be rushed. Why meaning becomes more important than achievement. After crisis, the nervous system no longer responds strongly to superficial rewards. It seeks coherence instead of stimulation, purpose instead of pressure, alignment instead of performance, depth instead of distraction. This is why quieter lives often begin to appeal more than impressive ones, not because you aim lower, but because you see more clearly. Transformation is not breakdown, it is recalibration. When you feel like a different person, it can seem like something was lost. But often, something false was shed. What remains is not smaller, it is more honest, less performative, less externally driven, more internally anchored. You are not becoming less, you are becoming more aligned. Closing reflection. If your old goals feel distant, if your previous identity feels unfamiliar, if your priorities have quietly rearranged themselves, you are not lost. You are evolving. The life that once fit you was built by who you were. The life that will fulfill you will be built by who you are becoming. And though the space between identities can feel uncertain, it is also where truth begins to take shape. The difference between fatigue and burnout. Signs of emotional depletion and why rest no longer restores you. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep can fix. Your muscles ache. Your body feels heavy. You rest, and strength returns. But there is another kind of exhaustion. You sleep through the night and wake up just as depleted. You take a day off and feel no renewal. You try to relax and feel strangely unchanged. This is the moment many people begin to wonder, why doesn't rest help anymore? Fatigue versus burnout. What's the difference? Ordinary fatigue follows a clear rhythm: effort to rest to recovery. You expend energy, you pause, your system repairs itself. Burnout does not follow this rhythm. Because burnout is not simply depletion of energy, it is depletion of emotional and nervous system resources. Fatigue lives in the body. Burnout lives in the nervous system. Fatigue improves with rest. Burnout persists despite it. What burnout really is? Burnout is not sudden collapse. It is slow erosion. It develops when prolonged stress meets prolonged responsibility without adequate recovery, control, or emotional support. Over time, the nervous system becomes overloaded. It stops cycling between activation and rest. Instead, it remains in a prolonged state of strain. Eventually, the system begins to shut down non-essential functions, including emotional responsiveness. This is not weakness. It is protective shutdown. Signs of emotional exhaustion. Burnout rarely announces itself dramatically. It appears in subtle shifts. You feel drained before the day begins. Small tasks feel disproportionately heavy. You become emotionally detached from things you once cared about. You feel irritable, but too tired to explain why. Motivation fades, even for meaningful goals. You feel overwhelmed by minor decisions. You withdraw from connection. You feel numb rather than sad. Perhaps most confusing of all, you continue functioning. From the outside, you appear capable. Inside, you feel depleted. The emotional numbing response. When emotional load exceeds capacity, the nervous system reduces emotional intensity. This numbing protects against overwhelm, but it also dulls joy, enthusiasm, and connection. You may notice less excitement, less empathy, less emotional range, less engagement with life. This is not indifference, it is overload protection. Why rest alone doesn't repair burnout? If burnout is not caused by physical exertion, physical rest alone cannot resolve it. Burnout persists because the nervous system does not experience safety during rest. You may stop working, but your mind continues, replaying conversations, anticipating problems, feeling pressure, holding unresolved tension. The body is still, the system is not. True recovery requires the nervous system to exit threat mode. Without this shift, rest becomes passive exhaustion rather than restoration. The role of invisible load. Many people experiencing burnout are not overworked in obvious ways. They are overburdened in invisible ways. Emotional labor, constant responsibility, decision fatigue, unexpressed stress, lack of boundaries, persistent uncertainty, pressure to function despite depletion. When effort is continuous and recovery is incomplete, the nervous system never resets. Over time, depletion accumulates faster than restoration. When even enjoyment feels like effort. One of the clearest signs of burnout is this. Things you once did to recharge now feel like tasks. Socializing feels draining. Hobbies feel like obligations. Leisure feels like effort. This happens because the nervous system no longer has surplus energy. It is operating at minimum reserves. Even pleasure requires energy, and there is none left to spend. Burnout is not failure. It is system overload. Many people interpret burnout as a personal flaw. I'm not strong enough. I should handle this better. Others cope. Why can't I? But burnout is not a failure of resilience. It is the result of prolonged demand without adequate restoration. Any nervous system under sustained strain will eventually reach its threshold. Your exhaustion is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of prolonged endurance. Recovery begins with nervous system safety. Burnout does not resolve through pushing harder, nor through brief escapes from stress. Recovery begins when the nervous system experiences reduced pressure predictability, emotional support, permission to rest without guilt, moments free from performance demands, space to feel without suppression. Healing begins when the system learns it no longer has to brace for impact. Closing reflection. If sleep does not restore you, if rest does not refresh you, if even joy feels effortful, you may not be tired. You may be depleted. Not because you are weak, but because you have been strong for too long without relief. And recovery begins not when you force yourself forward, but when your nervous system finally learns it is safe to stop holding everything together. When nothing ahead feels joyful, living on autopilot, and how stress distorts our perception of time. There is a quiet shift that many people struggle to put into words. You still make plans, you still complete tasks, you still move through your days. But the future no longer feels alive. Nothing ahead feels exciting. Nothing feels worth anticipating. Tomorrow feels like a continuation, not a possibility. You are moving forward, but you are no longer looking forward. When anticipation disappears. Anticipation is a subtle form of hope. It lives in small thoughts. I'm looking forward to this. That will feel good. I can't wait. When the nervous system is healthy and regulated, the brain naturally projects forward in search of reward and meaning. But under prolonged stress, this forward projection begins to fade. The future stops feeling like something to move toward. It begins to feel like something to endure. The experience of living on autopilot. Many people describe this period as functioning mechanically. You wake up, you complete responsibilities, you respond to messages, you fulfill obligations, you go to sleep. Days pass, but you feel absent from them. You are participating in life without inhabiting it. This is not laziness, it is not apathy, it is psychological automation. When emotional resources are depleted, the brain conserves energy by shifting behavior into routine patterns. Autopilot allows survival when presence feels too costly. Why the brain stops imagining joy. The human brain is predictive. It constantly simulates the future to guide motivation and behavior. But when stress is chronic and reward feels scarce, the brain reduces reward-based forecasting. Why imagine pleasure that may not arrive? Why invest energy in hope that could lead to disappointment? Instead, the brain narrows its focus to immediate tasks and short-term survival. This reduces emotional risk, but it also reduces inspiration.
How chronic stress alters time perception. Stress changes not only how we feel, but how we experience time.
Under prolonged stress, days blur together, weeks pass unnoticed, memories feel compressed, the future feels shortened, long-term thinking becomes difficult. When the nervous system operates in survival mode, attention narrows to the present moment's demands. This is adaptive in crisis, but when prolonged, it erodes a sense of continuity between past, present, and future. Life begins to feel flat and repetitive, not because time has changed, but because perception has. The shrinking of the future. When emotional energy is low, the mind stops projecting far ahead. Long-term dreams feel abstract. Big plans feel overwhelming. Even near-future events feel emotionally neutral. This is not a lack of ambition, it is a lack of emotional bandwidth. Hope requires energy. Imagination requires safety. Anticipation requires the belief that joy is possible. Stress quietly erodes all three. Why autopilot feels safer than engagement? Engagement requires emotional exposure. To hope is to risk disappointment. To anticipate is to risk loss. To invest is to risk pain. When the nervous system has endured prolonged strain, it may reduce emotional investment as a protective strategy. Autopilot becomes a buffer. You function, you cope. You avoid further emotional depletion. It is not living fully, but it is surviving efficiently. The hidden fear beneath emotional flatness. When the future loses its emotional charge, people often assume they have lost purpose. But beneath the flatness is often something quieter. Fear of further exhaustion, fear of more disappointment, fear of carrying more than you can sustain. So the psyche reduces forward emotional investment. Not because the future is empty, but because you have been too full for too long. Reawakening the sense of tomorrow. The sense of future does not return through forcing optimism. It returns when the nervous system regains capacity, when pressure softens, when safety increases, when emotional reserves begin to replenish. At first, anticipation returns in small forms, looking forward to a quiet evening, noticing pleasure in simple routines, feeling mild curiosity about tomorrow. These moments may seem insignificant, but they signal something profound. The future is becoming imaginable again. Closing reflection. If the days feel repetitive, if tomorrow feels emotionally neutral, if nothing ahead seems to call you forward, you may not have lost your future. You may be living in a nervous system that learned to focus only on survival. And when your system no longer needs to brace for what comes next, time will widen again. Possibility will return. And one day, without forcing it, you will notice yourself thinking, maybe there is something ahead worth meeting. The endless stream of bad news. Fatigue from uncertainty and the effect of emotional overload. At no other time in history have human beings been exposed to so much suffering in a single day. War in one region, economic fear in another, disasters, crises, threats, instability delivered in real time to the device in your hand. before breakfast, you may have absorbed more distressing information than previous generations encountered in months. And yet the day has only begun. The endless stream of alarming information. Modern life does not allow distress to remain distant. News alerts vibrate in your pocket. Headlines compete for urgency. Algorithms amplify what provokes the strongest emotional reaction. Because fear captures attention, and attention keeps you scrolling. You are not simply informed, you are continuously exposed. And the nervous system was never designed for uninterrupted global awareness of danger. Why negative news feels inescapable? The human brain evolved with a negativity bias, a survival mechanism that prioritizes threat detection. We notice danger faster than safety. We remember fear more vividly than calm. We attend more strongly to risk than to stability. Modern media ecosystems exploit this bias. Alarming information spreads faster. Threat-based headlines receive more engagement. Uncertainty generates repeated checking. The result is an environment where danger feels constant, even when it is distant. Living under a background of global anxiety. You may not feel actively afraid, but you may feel tense without knowing why, mentally crowded, emotionally fatigued, unable to fully relax. This is the effect of a continuous anxiety backdrop. The nervous system absorbs signals of threat even when they are not personally immediate. Your body reacts to what your mind repeatedly witnesses. The fatigue of uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the most psychologically taxing experiences. The brain prefers a known negative outcome over an unknown one. Why? Because uncertainty prevents closure. It keeps the nervous system scanning for updates, preparing for multiple possibilities, unable to rest. When uncertainty persists globally, economic instability, geopolitical tension, environmental fears, the psyche cannot resolve the threat. There is no clear ending, only ongoing vigilance. This produces a specific exhaustion, uncertainty fatigue. Emotional overload, when the system receives more than it can process. Humans are capable of empathy and concern, but we are not designed to emotionally process the suffering of the entire world in real time. When exposure exceeds processing capacity, the nervous system protects itself through numbing, detachment, avoidance, emotional shutdown, scrolling without absorbing. This is not indifference. It is overload protection. Too much feeling becomes unsustainable, so the system reduces feeling altogether. Why you feel drained without doing anything. You may finish a day feeling exhausted despite minimal physical activity, because emotional processing consumes enormous neurological energy. Every alarming headline triggers micro-stress responses. Every distressing image activates emotional circuitry. Every uncertain update sustains vigilance. Your body responds as if exposed to repeated signals of threat, even while sitting still. The illusion of control through constant checking. Many people feel compelled to refresh news feeds repeatedly. This behavior is driven by a subconscious belief. If I stay informed, I stay prepared. If I stay prepared, I stay safe. But constant monitoring rarely increases safety. Instead, it prolongs activation. The nervous system never receives the signal that the threat has passed, because new threats appear every hour. The emotional cost of caring in a connected world. Caring about the world is human, but constant exposure to global distress without the power to intervene creates empathetic strain. You feel concern without resolution, awareness without agency, responsivity without relief. Over time, this produces emotional fatigue and quiet helplessness. When overexposure leads to emotional withdrawal. To preserve stability, the psyche may begin to withdraw. Less engagement with news, reduced emotional reaction, avoidance of serious topics, a sense of detachment from global events. This is not apathy, it is nervous system self-preservation. When emotional bandwidth is exceeded, withdrawal becomes protection. Restoring balance in an overstimulated world. Relief does not come from ignorance, it comes from boundaries. Intentional media consumption, limited exposure windows, choosing depth over constant updates, replacing doom scrolling with restorative input, protecting mental quiet. The nervous system requires intervals free from alarm. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is recovery. Closing reflection. If the world feels heavy, if uncertainty feels exhausting, if constant information leaves you emotionally numb, you are not weak. You are human in an age of unlimited exposure. Your nervous system was built for villages, not global crisis streams. And when you allow yourself spaces of quiet, limits to the noise, and permission to not carry the entire world at once, you may discover that beneath the overload, your capacity to feel, care, and live fully has been waiting patiently for room to breathe. Loss of trust in people. Reduced need for communication, and why loneliness deepens apathy. There comes a time when conversation feels heavier than silence. Messages remain unanswered. Invitations feel like obligations. Even the thought of explaining how you feel is exhausting. It is not that you hate people. It is not that you stopped caring. You are simply tired of contact. When connection begins to feel draining, human beings are wired for connection. Yet after prolonged stress, disappointment, conflict, or emotional overload, social interaction can shift from nourishing to exhausting. Small talk feels effortful. Emotional conversations feel overwhelming. Being present for others feels like a demand you cannot meet. You begin declining invitations. You delay replies. You choose solitude over engagement. Not out of rejection, but out of depletion. The gradual erosion of trust. Trust is built through safety, consistency, and emotional reliability. But repeated experiences of misunderstanding, betrayal, emotional neglect, or relational strain can quietly reshape expectations. You begin to guard your words. You hesitate to share honestly. You anticipate disappointment before connection begins. Over time, the nervous system learns. Connection may equal pain. Vulnerability may equal risk. Closeness may equal exhaustion. So it reduces openness, not consciously, protectively. Why the need for social interaction decreases. When emotional reserves are low, the nervous system prioritizes conservation. Social interaction requires emotional attunement, cognitive engagement, empathy, self-regulation, responsiveness. These processes consume energy. When energy is scarce, the psyche simplifies demands. Silence requires less effort. Solitude requires less regulation. Withdrawal preserves resources. This is not antisocial behavior.
It is energy management. The difference between restorative solitude and protective isolation. Solitude can be healing. It provides space for reflection, regulation, and recovery. But protective isolation is different. Restorative solitude feels peaceful. Protective isolation feels emotionally flat. One replenishes energy, the other prevents further depletion. When isolation is driven by exhaustion rather than choice, it may signal nervous system overload rather than a preference for aloneness. When people feel unsafe, even if they are not. After emotional strain, the nervous system can become hyper-aware of relational risk. You may notice increased sensitivity to tone, fear of being misunderstood, anticipation of conflict, difficulty expressing needs, emotional withdrawal during conversations. This is not deliberate avoidance. It is the nervous system attempting to minimize potential stress. Why? Loneliness intensifies apathy. Human nervous systems regulate through connection. Safe interaction reduces stress hormones. Shared presence stabilizes emotional states. Co-regulation restores balance. When connection decreases, this regulatory support disappears. The result can include reduced emotional stimulation, decreased motivation, flattened mood, lower dopamine activity, increased feelings of emptiness. Loneliness does not only feel painful, it biologically reduces vitality. Without relational engagement, the nervous system receives fewer signals of safety and reward. Over time, apathy can deepen. The paradox of social exhaustion. When depleted, you withdraw to conserve energy. But prolonged isolation can increase emotional flatness and reduce motivation to reconnect. This creates a cycle: exhaustion to withdrawal, withdrawal to loneliness, loneliness to reduced vitality. Reduced vitality leads to less motivation to connect. Breaking this cycle requires gentleness, not force. Loss of trust as a protective adaptation. If trust feels harder than it once did, it may not be because people changed. It may be because your nervous system learned caution through experience. Trust requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires safety. Safety requires predictability. When safety feels uncertain, distance feels stabilizing. Distance is not rejection. Distance is regulation. Relearning safe connection. Connection does not need to return all at once. Safety can be rebuilt gradually. Brief interactions without pressure, time with emotionally safe people. Shared silence instead of constant conversation. Presence without performance. Connection without the need to explain everything. Trust rebuilds through repeated experiences of safety, not forced openness. Closing reflection. If you feel less drawn to people, if trust feels harder than before, if silence feels safer than conversation, you are not becoming cold. You are protecting what remains of your energy. But beneath the withdrawal, the human need for safe connection still exists. And when connection becomes gentle, safe, and undemanding, you may discover that your capacity to relate was never lost, only waiting for a space where it feels safe to return.
When it isn't laziness or weakness.
The overlooked symptoms, and when it's time to seek help. Some people stop feeling joy. Others stop feeling anything at all. They still go to work, they answer messages, they smile when expected, they function. From the outside, nothing seems wrong. Inside, life feels muted, distant, weightless. This is why hidden depression often goes unnoticed, even by the person experiencing it. When it isn't laziness. Many people describe a quiet loss of drive. Simple tasks feel overwhelming. Motivation feels inaccessible. Starting anything requires enormous effort. They tell themselves, "I'm just lazy. I need more discipline. I should push harder." But laziness implies unwillingness. Depression involves inability. You may want to act, yet feel internally immobilized. This is not a failure of character. It is a depletion of psychological energy. The quiet nature of hidden depression. Depression is not always visible sadness. It can appear as emotional flatness, persistent fatigue, loss of interest, difficulty experiencing pleasure, detachment from life, reduced motivation, mental fog, feeling disconnected from oneself. Because these symptoms are subtle, they are often normalized. People continue functioning while quietly struggling. This is sometimes called high-functioning depression or smiling depression. Apathy, when motivation fades. Apathy is not the absence of caring, it is the absence of accessible energy to care. You may notice goals feel meaningless, decisions feel exhausting, nothing feels worth the effort. Even enjoyable activities feel neutral. This can feel frightening, but apathy often emerges when the nervous system has been overloaded for too long. When emotional reserves are depleted, motivation shuts down to conserve energy. This is protection, not weakness. Symptoms people often ignore. Hidden depression rarely arrives dramatically. Instead, it shows up in patterns people dismiss. Feeling tired, regardless of sleep. Losing interest in things once enjoyed. Withdrawing from social contact. Difficulty concentrating. Irritability or emotional numbness. Procrastination rooted in overwhelm. Feeling emotionally flat. Increased escapism, scrolling, binge-watching, avoidance. Persistent sense of heaviness or emptiness. Because these signs develop gradually, they can be mistaken for stress, personality changes, or temporary fatigue. Why people minimize their own suffering. Many people delay acknowledging depression because others seem to have it worse. Life circumstances appear fine. They can still function. They fear judgment or stigma. They believe they should handle it alone. But emotional suffering does not need to be catastrophic to be real. Pain does not become valid only when it becomes unbearable. The difference between burnout and depression. Burnout is often tied to specific stressors and may improve with recovery and boundary changes. Depression affects broader emotional experience and may persist even when external stress decreases. Burnout says, "I am exhausted by what I must do." Depression says, "I feel nothing,
even when I don't have to do anything. The two can overlap, and often do. When to consider seeking help. Reaching out for support is not a last resort. It is a form of care. Consider seeking help if emotional numbness persists for weeks or months. Daily functioning feels increasingly difficult. Joy and interest do not return with rest. Feelings of emptiness or hopelessness deepen. Isolation increases despite desire for connection. Sleep and energy patterns remain disrupted. Life feels more endured than lived. Support can include therapy, counseling, medical consultation, or trusted support networks. Seeking help does not mean something is wrong with you. It means something within you needs support. Why support matters. Depression narrows perception. It can make the future feel closed, options feel limited, and change feel impossible. External support introduces perspective, structure, and co-regulation. Healing rarely occurs in isolation. Humans regulate and recover in connection. You do not have to wait until it gets worse. Many people believe they must reach a breaking point before asking for help. But earlier support often leads to gentler recovery. Care is not reserved for crisis. Care is appropriate whenever suffering begins to interfere with living. Closing reflection. If you feel emotionally numb, if motivation feels unreachable, if life feels muted rather than painful, you are not weak. You are not lazy. You may be carrying more than your nervous system can hold alone. And asking for support is not surrender. It is an act of courage and the beginning of feeling again. Nostalgia and the idealization of earlier times. How the brain edits memory and the myth of a golden past. Have you ever noticed how memories seem warmer than the moments you live in now? Songs from years ago feel deeper. Old summers feel brighter. Past friendships feel more genuine. Even difficult periods seem strangely meaningful in retrospect. Meanwhile, the present can feel muted, rushed, or emotionally distant. It can begin to seem as if life used to be more alive than it is today. But memory does not preserve reality. It edits it. The emotional glow of nostalgia. Nostalgia is not simply remembering the past. It is remembering the past through emotional warmth. Psychologically, nostalgia serves a stabilizing function. It reinforces identity. It restores a sense of continuity. It reminds us that meaning has existed before. During periods of stress, uncertainty, or emotional depletion, the mind turns toward memory for comfort. The past becomes a refuge when the present feels overwhelming. Why the brain softens negative memories. Human memory is not an objective archive. It is adaptive. Over time, the emotional intensity of negative experiences fades faster than positive ones, a phenomenon known as fading affect bias. Arguments are forgotten, stressful details blur, discomfort softens, pleasant emotions remain more vivid. This allows the psyche to maintain emotional stability and move forward without carrying the full weight of past pain. As a result, memories often become selectively warmer with time, not because the past was easier, but because the mind preserved what was emotionally sustainable. The illusion of the golden past. When the present feels heavy, the past can appear unusually luminous. You remember freedom, connection, possibility. You forget uncertainty, confusion, and doubt. This creates the illusion that life was once more vibrant. But what you are remembering is not an objective past. You are remembering less responsibility, greater novelty, a younger nervous system unformed, expectations, the emotional intensity of first experiences. Novelty intensifies memory, familiarity softens it. The present feels less vivid, not because life has lost color, but because it has become known. Why earlier life feels more emotionally charged? Early experiences often feel more alive because they were experienced for the first time. First independence, first love, first risks, first discoveries, first personal victories. Novelty activates dopamine and deep emotional encoding. Repetition does not produce the same intensity. This does not mean life was better, it means it was newer. Memory as meaning, not documentation. The brain does not store memories as recordings, it reconstructs them. Each time you recall an experience, you reshape it through your current emotional state. If the present feels heavy, the past may feel lighter. If the present feels uncertain, the past may feel stable. Memory becomes a psychological counterbalance, comparing the present to an edited past. When the present is compared to an idealized memory, it inevitably falls short. The present includes uncertainty, responsibility, fatigue, complexity, unfinished problems. Memories contain resolved narratives, emotional highlights, simplified stories, selective warmth. You are comparing reality to a curated highlight reel, and reality will always seem less luminous. Why nostalgia intensifies during difficult periods? During times of stress, loneliness, or emotional depletion, nostalgia can intensify. This is not regression, it is self-regulation. Remembering meaningful experiences restores a sense of continuity and belonging. It reassures the nervous system. Life has held meaning before. Connection has existed before. Joy has been possible before. Nostalgia is the psyche reminding itself that aliveness is real. The danger of living in comparison. Nostalgia can comfort, but comparison can wound. If the past becomes a standard the present must match, the present will always feel insufficient. But the past was not lived with hindsight. It contained uncertainty you have since forgotten. It contained fears you have since resolved. It contained struggles that shaped who you are now. The present is quieter, not emptier. Adulthood, responsibility, and experience bring stability, but they also reduce novelty. Life may feel less intense, but it can become more meaningful. Less dramatic, more grounded, less impulsive, more intentional. Intensity fades, depth grows. This transition can feel like loss, but it is evolution. reconnecting with aliveness now. The present regains emotional richness through novel experiences, attention to small details, deep engagement instead of distraction, presence instead of comparison, allowing new meaning rather than reliving old meaning. Aliveness is not confined to the past. It requires attention in the present. Closing reflection. If the past feels warmer, if memories feel more alive than today, if life once seemed more vibrant, you are not remembering incorrectly. You are remembering selectively. The past glows because the mind preserved what could sustain you. But life did not end back then. It changed texture. And when you meet the present without comparison, without nostalgia as a measuring stick, you may discover that aliveness has not disappeared. It has simply been waiting for your attention to bring it into focus again. Neuroplasticity and recovery. Why small steps work better than dramatic change. How the capacity for joy slowly returns. When life feels muted long enough, a quiet fear begins to form. What if this is permanent? What if I never feel like myself again? What if joy doesn't come back? This fear feels convincing because emotional numbness feels final. But the nervous system is not fixed. It is adaptive. And what adapted under pressure can adapt again under safety. The brain is not static, it is plastic. Neuroscience calls this ability neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself in response to experience. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition. Emotional responses can be reshaped. Stress patterns can be recalibrated. Safety can be relearned. Just as chronic stress trains the nervous system toward vigilance, repeated experiences of safety and regulation train it toward openness. Healing is not a return to the past, it is the formation of new pathways. Why recovery feels slow. Many people expect healing to feel dramatic. They wait for a sudden return of motivation, clarity, and joy. But nervous system recovery rarely arrives as a breakthrough. It arrives as subtle shifts, a slightly easier morning, a brief moment of calm, a small spark of curiosity, a flicker of interest. These changes may seem insignificant, but they signal neurological change. The system is recalibrating. Why small steps work better than radical change. When depleted, people often believe they need drastic life changes. Quit everything, move somewhere new, reinvent their identity, start over completely. But the nervous system does not heal through shock. It heals through safety and consistency. Small, repeatable actions signal safety more effectively than dramatic upheaval. Gentle routines, predictable rhythms, manageable goals, regular rest, small exposures to pleasure. Tiny steps build trust between you and your own nervous system. And trust is the foundation of recovery. The nervous system learns safety gradually. If stress trains the brain to anticipate threat, healing trains it to recognize safety. This learning occurs through repeated experiences such as moments without pressure, safe connection with others, time spent in calm environments, creative or sensory engagement, movement that releases tension, permission to rest
without guilt. Safety must be experienced repeatedly before the nervous system believes it. Healing is repetition, not revelation. How joy begins to return. Joy rarely returns as excitement. It returns as subtle permission. You may first notice music sounding slightly richer, food tasting more vivid, moments of quiet comfort, a sense of relief rather than pressure, gentle interest in small experiences. This is how emotional range reopens, not through intensity, through accessibility. The system begins allowing feeling again, from numbness to neutral, from neutral to alive. Recovery often follows a quiet progression. Numbness to neutrality, to mild comfort, to interest, to pleasure, to joy. Many people expect to move directly from numbness to happiness, but neutrality is progress. Feeling okay is not failure. It is the nervous system stabilizing, and stability precedes vitality. Why you cannot force yourself to feel joy is not produced by command. It emerges when the nervous system feels safe enough to experience it. Forcing positivity can increase pressure. Chasing happiness can reinforce the sense that something is missing. Instead, healing invites presence over performance, curiosity over expectation, gentleness over urgency. Joy returns when it is no longer demanded, rebuilding the capacity to feel. The capacity for joy is not lost, it is protected. During overload, the nervous system narrows emotional range to preserve stability. When pressure decreases, the range expands again. Like a muscle recovering after strain, emotional responsiveness strengthens gradually. Nothing is broken. Something is healing. The quiet courage of continuing recovery is not dramatic. It is quiet persistence. Getting out of bed on heavy mornings. Stepping outside even when motivation is low. Allowing moments of rest without guilt. Continuing despite emotional flatness. Trusting change before feeling it. These actions may feel small, but they are acts of nervous system retraining. Closing reflection. If life has felt muted, if joy feels distant, if you fear the color may never return, remember, your nervous system learned to survive. It can learn to feel again. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, through safety, repetition, and gentleness. And one day, without effort or expectation, you may notice a moment that feels warm, alive, quietly meaningful. Not the intensity of the past, but something steadier, something deeper, something that does not demand urgency to be real. The taste for life does return, often softly, often gradually, but faithfully, to those who allow themselves the time to heal.